Hello, welcome back to Sweet MTG, and welcome to Instant Deck Techs. In this series, we go over everything you need to build a certain commander. We'll go over the strategies and the types of cards needed you need to get the deck working. Any cards we mention will be down in the description below. In this video, we're going to be looking at Animar, Soul of Elements. It is green, blue, and a red for a 1/1 legendary creature elemental. It has protection from white and from black, as well as, whenever you cast a creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Animar. Creature spells you cast cost 1 generic less to cast for each +1/+1 counter on Animar. Animar Soul of Elements leads a Creature Matters deck with a +1/+1 counter subtheme. We want to get Animar out and then play lots of creatures, as those creatures will grow Animar. Each time we do this, it increases the cost reduction on the next creature spell that we cast. This can snowball really quickly, and means in a couple of turns we can be slamming huge creatures for next to no mana at all. What's really nice is that if those big creatures are entirely generic mana to cast, we can basically cast them for free. The first thing we need to go over is getting more +1/+1 counters onto Animar. Basically, the more counters we have on Animar, the cheaper all of our other creatures will be to cast. We'll start with cards like Hardened Scales and Vorinclex Monstrous Raider, which add the amount of counters being put onto our creatures. This means Animar will grow twice as fast. Then you have a card like Forgotten Ancient, which sits there collecting counters, ready for us to move it over to Animar on our upkeep, letting us have a truly huge turn. Then we have some auras that we can equip to Animar, which also add the amount of counters that we're putting on it. We have things like Forced Adaptation, Predatory Hunger, and Hydra's Growth. Do remember that Animar also has protection from white and black, meaning opponents' creatures of those colours can't even block it. These spells can really help turn Animar into a game-ending threat all by itself. Moving over to our ramp now, and because of the synergies that we have with Animar, we're going to want to run as many of them on creatures as possible. We first have our mana dorks that sit there and tap for mana. There are absolutely plenty of options out there to suit anyone's budget, but the general rule is the ones that cost 1 mana can tap for just a single colour. When they start costing 2 or more mana to cast, they need to help fix all of our colours. Then we have creatures that can go and get lands out of our deck and put them into play. These add some nice diversity to our ramp, as if there's a board wipe it doesn't matter, as we've already got that land that we need with them. Then lastly, we have creatures that let us untap lands when they enter the battlefield. These will hopefully have some cost reduction from Animar, so that they end up generating more mana than it took to cast them. We'll also be running some return to hand effects in our win con section, which go great with these and can do some really nutty things. Moving over to our card draw, and like with the ramp, this is going to be revolving around those creatures. First up we have spells that draw us cards when we play creatures. We have things like Beast Whisperer, Guardian Project, Primordial Sage, Soul of the Harvest, and Zendikar Resurgent. Any of these are absolutely perfect, as so many of the cards in this deck are going to be creatures, we'll be drawing an absolute ton of cards with these. Then, because all those creatures will make Animar huge, spells that draw us cards equal to a creature's power will also be fantastic, with Return of the Wild Speaker and Rishkar's Expertise being great examples of this. And then after that, we also have creatures that draw us cards when they enter the battlefield themselves. A lot of times, because of the cost reduction of Animar, we're going to just be paying a green, a blue, or a red mana pip. So having these in the deck just to replace themselves so we can go ahead and cast something else is exactly what we're looking for. And then finally, we have some spells that let us cast creatures from the top of our library. If we don't get stuck in a vein of lands, these can let us draw a ton more creatures that we then get to cast for cheap with Animar. Moving over to our interaction, this probably won't shock you to find out we're going to start with effects on creatures. There's plenty of options out there in these colours all over the curve, with things like Reclamation Sage, Foundation Breaker, and Acidic Slime being really good at removing artifacts and enchantments. They can, however, struggle with permanently removing creatures, and that's where the instants and sorceries come in. This is the main area of the deck where I would look to run instants and sorceries, as cards like Pongify, Reality Shift, Beast Within, and Chaos Warp are some of the most versatile answers out there. And then you have things like Chandra's Ignition and Blasphemous Act, which are super solid board wipes that the deck needs. Although Animar has protection from 2 of the colours of magic, there's still plenty out there that can take it down, so some protection is needed to keep it around. First up, again, we have some creatures. Spellskite and Glenalenja Archmage are both really good, and very annoying ways to mess up our opponent's plans. We then obviously have Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, which protect Animar and can then be moved onto something huge that we play for cheap so we can get haste and crunch in straight away. After that, we have some cheap counter magic, primarily to be aimed at an opponent's board wipe, but they're also just nice to have around as well. Finally, we have a little bit of weird protection in the form of the Ozolith. This lets us store the progress that we've been making with Animar, so that if it ever gets removed, we can just recast it and then we're right where we left off. Moving over to our win cons, we have a number of really cool effects to choose from. First up is an unassuming common from Dragons of Tarkir. That is by far the most broken card in this deck. Ancestral Statue is 4 generic mana for a 3/4 golem that has, when it enters the battlefield, return a non-land permanent you control to its owner's hand. Importantly, this includes itself. If you have Animar out and it already has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, your Animar is about to get infinitely huge. Because of the cost reduction from Animar, you can cast the Ancestral statue and then return it to your hand as much as you want. Each time you cast it, Animar will get bigger, so you then have infinite generic mana cost reduction on creatures, and infinite instances of a creature entering the battlefield. So with that infinite cost reduction, you can make an infinitely large walking ballista and mow down the table. Or if you like, with infinite instances of a creature entering the battlefield, you can deal your opponents damage with cards like Impact Tremors, Perforus God of the Forge, and Warstorm Surge. Even without Ancestral Statue, we'll be playing so many creatures that these can really do a ton of damage to our opponents on their own. While Ancestral Statue is the best version of that effect, there are cards like Equilibrium and Temur Sabertooth, which, while needing a bit of mana to get going, can give you load of repeated value from all those enter the battlefield effects that this deck is going to be running. Cloudstone Curio probably does a better impression, but does require 2 colourless creatures to really pop off, and is currently super expensive, having currently only seen 1 proper printing, so maybe hold off on this one until it gets a reprint. Next up in terms of winning is the always tried and true hit an opponent with a big thing, and they don't come much bigger than some Eldrazi. With the cost reduction of Animar, these can be free to cast, which is a very scary proposition. Fortunately, there is still plenty of more budget friendly options out there as well. What you're looking for is a bucket load of power and toughness, and in the same way as the Eldrazi, generally look for colourless creatures. Again, this is just so we can get to a point where we can be casting these for free, all the while triggering things like some of our card draw effects, so we can start churning creatures into play again and again. If you do want to run some with some coloured pips, you can look to run some huge creatures in Temur that have Cascade. Casting these and getting extra things off of them will be absolutely fantastic. Maelstrom Wander also giving our creatures haste will be great, as it means we can start hitting with everything as soon as possible. On that thought, running some extra ways of giving our team haste is something I'd want to consider as well. Rhythm of the Wild gives haste, or it can make the creature bigger, and then Temur Ascendancy gives us the haste that we want, while also drawing us even more cards when one of our big threats comes into play. Rounding off the deck with some utility lands, we can't run too many as we are a 3-colour deck, but what we do have is pretty nice. First up is Reliquary Tower. With all the cards that we'll be aiming to draw, keeping them in our hand will be very helpful. We then have Rogue's Passage, which means when Animar is nice and huge, it is guaranteed to get through for that 21 points of commander damage. Then we also have Alchemist's Refuge, which lets us drop some of our creatures whenever we want to, so our opponents are always guessing. Next up we have Castle Garenbrig and Mosswort Bridge. The castle is some nice additional ramp, and Mosswort Bridge will help us cheat something awesome into play very easily in this deck. Then lastly we have Llanowar Reborn, Forge of Heroes, and Oran Reef the Vastwood. We're primarily running these to help put some extra counters onto Animar, so we can get that ball rolling all the quicker. The rest of your mana base will be very dependent on what you have available to you. We've recently released a video with some advice on building a deck with a budget mana base, which might be of help. Until next time, please like, share and subscribe, and let us know down in the comments if there are any commanders you'd like to see a deck tech on. Thank you very much for watching.